Hello everyone, this is Willow Windblown. This is going to be my last video in this painting series and maybe my last video for a long time. I just started working in a very prestigious print shop, which I've been enjoying a lot. Since I just started, though, I still haven't figured out how I'm going to manage my free time where I can produce artwork and be creative while still having time to rest and see friends. Until I have that figured out, I'm not going to be posting videos for a while. I recently graduated from college and I have a new job. I moved and I finished this painting and the summer's over. I know that last one might sound a bit strange, but the end of summer has always meant the start of a new school year, which meant a lot of new beginnings for me, and overall a lot of things in my life have come to an end, and a lot of new things are just beginning. As this chapter in my life, both personally and artistically, is coming to an end and a new one is beginning, I thought it'd be good to reflect on what has largely been the last 4 years of my life, and really try to tie things up and put things into word, so that I can start things new. About 4 years ago, while sitting on a bus from New York to Baltimore, like many times before, I watched the transitions in the landscape. I believe I was a freshman in college at that time. In art school, students are taught to construct an artistic persona around their identity. Forming an identity is something that comes easier for some than others, and I'm one of those people who've always struggled with it. I've always been interested in history and I've always been interested in the world, and compared to all the things I've seen and read, I've never found myself nearly as interesting. The only real thing I did at the time was paint, so I figured that was what made me unique. So that was it. My identity or my persona as an artist was that of a painter. In my mind, this identity was something romantic but tragic, proud but self-destructive. At the time, I came up with lots of poetry that detailed these great existential issues I believed I was supposed to have, and fundamentally, these were things I never really felt. I was just acting because I thought that was what I was supposed to do. That day, on that bus ride to Baltimore, I was writing my typical tragic romantic observation-based poetry, but this time I was particularly drawn to the shipyards at a distance during this cold wintry May. There's something beautiful about this landscape, a kind of concrete after rain on a warm summer day type of beauty that I couldn't really explain. Trying to find words to describe these sensations, I recorded outside, pollution, decay, and morning light. At first these words absently describe subjects and imagery, but there's meaning in these words that are greater than the individual parts. Pollution referred to the state of the world, and decay described the infrastructure I observed. And morning light referenced the time of day, which happened to be my favorite time to paint and was also a very special time of day, where everything just kind of is cast in a romantic light and looks very beautiful. Pollution, decay, and morning light. Over the years I've developed many different interpretations of the meaning of these phrases. First, these words guided me to take interest in how the romantic fantasy of the American landscape that's rooted in the Hudson River Valley School of Painting was also a tool for the systematic destruction of the environment. Then they guided me to become interested in the smaller combination of these ideas and the effects they had on everyday life, which shifted my practice from a more dreamlike landscapes describing ephemeral moments locked in my memory to common subjects like the different roads and street signs I saw in the suburbs. These interpretations seem to have changed based on what's happening in my life in the world and where I find I am with my life. I prefer not to explain how they apply to this painting, and instead I would prefer for you to look at this painting and contemplate pollution, decay, and morning light, and see if this changes the way you look at what I'm working on. I think it'd be nice to wrap things up by reading that poem that I wrote so many years ago. The title of the poem is A Portrait and Other Fractured Landscapes, and it begins with a poem that I had written back in high school when trying to kind of address this topic of identity, which is something that even as far as back then I had always kind of struggled with. That introduction reads, "A tangled mess of line and scribbles, some no more than inkless impressions on the page, others so loud the page curls around it. Every line different but all from the same pen, every pen different but all held by the same hand, hundreds of thousands of lines all forever bound to their page, mistakes inerasable and sacrifices made for the sake of the form, Sacrifices at the most extreme include starting over, but generally meant minor distortions in the subtle losses of value only seen by the orchestrator. I found myself within my pen, and I found myself unable to live without it. I often ask myself which line am I to be on my page, and what role my line is to play in this page's form. A mistake, a cover-up, or a stroke that makes the piece. After that poem, which I had written in italics and in a much smaller font, which I hope at the time would kind of convey the fact that it was some sort of introduction to a poem, the actual piece begins. So, with a bus engine for a lullaby, the newborn ahead of him sleeps in his young mother's arms. Not used to her obviously fake nails, the woman to his right struggles to relearn how to use her phone. The man in the row behind her continues his quest to discover new ways to sit in his seat. The typing of the woman on his left grows more frantic as she realizes the relationship she is trying to save will never work. Wondering how forcefully he'll have to back his seat into the little kid sitting behind him to make him stop kicking his chair, tiredly he sat in a once cold phyllo-green cheap carpet seat, now stained closer to sap. Outside, pollution, decay, and morning light. Mountains made of rigging, docile machines reduced to just simple abstract shapes. Hard geometry in the bones of Bellows landscape on a soft Corot kind of morning. Earth tones naturally cover the sky. Rust reds read purple without the support of their complement. Translucent iron oxide orange, a surprisingly expensive color, sculpt hard contours critics would vilify over forms catching morning light. Cold blue, probably through association, color shadows. He always tells himself he'll come back and paint. He won't. Despite the color relationships and abstract shapes, these days about as exciting as chemistry or hospital drapes, his hand began to twitch again. Disappointed, he looked at his right hand, pathetically clinging to an esoteric brush grip, like an addict to his last fix. He closed his eyes and tried to feel the texture of the once cold phyllo-green cheap carpet seats. Bored, he wondered what he expected to feel besides a seat cushion. A timely kick to the back of his chair gave him an excuse to open his eyes. He checked the state of those around him. The newborn still sleeps. The woman with obviously fake nails finally managed to swipe her ignore button for Nikki Reina's call. The man in the row behind her, satisfied with his quest, sat upside down with his spine in a knot and his legs where his head should be, frantically typing the woman to his left stop. The siege befallen on the back of his seat began to break. Outside, pollution, decay, morning and morning light. Like seeds were posts in shallow water sown, scattered by years windblown. Remains damp and swollen, with almost every suggestion of their past life stolen, he reminded himself it hurts to see without a brush, as he tried to ignore the warped wood beautifully flaked with paint, speckled with mold. An empty blue, tangled with an achromatic purple, his eyes absently masked a tree line of vacant advertisement signs with a hazy distant city. If winter was a color, he'd probably have once found meaning in it, passed by with the scenery. He reminded himself, outside, pollution, decay, and morning light. Just outside, pollution, decay, and morning light. I wrote some more poetry after that, but I largely transitioned into writing those more formal artist statements because, I don't know, maybe it was the influence of my professors, but they always wanted me to make these pedagogical stands where I'm trying to tackle this big issue, and writing something that's kind of suggestive and elusive like a poem didn't quite feel appropriate for the issues that I was really concerned with at the time, which were climate change, which... yeah, I didn't really think a poem was the right way to address that, so I didn't write poetry for many years, but that changed in my senior thesis. Fast forward about 3 years, and the next piece of poetry was actually something I wrote for my senior thesis. Its title is If Winter Was a Color, and it summarizes the next step in my kind of progression as an artist from my earlier series of A Portrait and Other Fractured Landscapes. This poem reads, an achromatic purple, cold yet laced with umber, not quite maroon, wet without warmth, gray without a complement, If winter was a color, if winter was a feeling, I found this to be it. Outside the same, pollution, decay, and morning light. A global pandemic lingers on my mind, yet it still feels so far away. The sun shines as the seasons turn, and 3 days remain until Cuomo reopens my world. Still, I'm not ready to go outside. Strange are the cold comforts, the barriers of the isolation. Quarantine at least reminds me of my place within the larger whole. That was a poem that largely expressed my experience of Ithaca. The poem starts out with what I would describe as Ithaca purple, which it's kind of interesting in upstate New York. There's this tone of that I pretty thoroughly described in the beginning of the poem, this purple tone that kind of washes over everything in that landscape. And it's a little bit disturbing once you start to see it, because once you start to see it, you begin to see it in every single thing you look at. And you can never really unsee it, and there's just this looming kind of dark, cold color that follows you everywhere you go. I'm not sure if this was just the actual space, or this is me projecting my mental state onto this space, but yeah, that is at least a pretty good summary of my experience in Ithaca. And yeah, that was why I decided to make it my thesis. I think that's enough for this video. Since this is the last video, I'm just going to leave things there and let you listen to some music and enjoy the conclusion of this painting. If you haven't already, please subscribe and click the notification bell so that when I do post a new video, you'll be notified. Thank you very much for watching and all your support. This was really the first time I've ever tried to do anything like this, and I spent a lot of time getting out of my comfort zone and learning how to do new things and experiment, and everybody was just so supportive throughout the entire process. And I don't know how to express it, but that just really meant a lot to me, and thank you. So yeah, thank you very much for watching, and I hope you have a nice day.